everybody. Welcome back to dinanddaf. Chodesh Tov. This is Elana Stein Hain. We are conceptualizing halakha on the basis of daf yomi of the week. We are in a two-week series, the second of a two-week series on ribbit, on not taking, giving, or being involved in the taking or giving of interest and a loan between two Jews. And last week we talked about the reasons for the isser, potential reasons or logics behind the isser. And this week we are talking about the very important legal circumvention that is available to not violate the prohibition, but also be able to end up surviving and thriving in a society that runs on capital. So in general, I would say some of you know that I have an abiding interest in legal circumventions. I think that legal circumventions, or as Chazal variably call them, sometimes ha'arama, hey ayin resh mem hey, meaning from either the word cunning, like the snake, or ma, as in prudence, in the book of Mishlei. I think they are very, very, very important. Sometimes they are called takanot, meaning they are simply decrees that Chazal make in a using a circumventing methodology. But either way, I think that legal circumventions are really, really important ways to try to hold two values together. The values of, in this case, the Torah wanting us to be able to thrive, to be able to live in any sort of economy that we are part of, especially a non-agricultural economy, without having to not be able to subsist, and the value of ensuring that all the reasons we mentioned last week that ribbit is considered a prohibition are not things that we should lose sight of, and not to mention the value in general of following halakha. So trying to hold all of these together, very important in my opinion. And anybody who's interested in reading more about that, I got to plug my book, because you write it because you want people to read it. It's called Circumventing the Law, Rabbinic Perspectives on Loopholes and Legal Integrity. You can find it at University of Pennsylvania Press online and get a 30% discount if you type in all caps PENN dash ESHAIN 30, the number 30. I'll also put it in the source sheets, but I'm definitely very passionate about the topic, and I think it's important for us to think about in certainly religious tradition that prizes law as a way of thinking about morality, and not just as a way of being rote or robotic. So Heter Iska. First thing I want to say is it's interesting to note that the Heter Iska is not something that starts off in the Gemara necessarily as like a heter, right? It seems to start off in the Gemara as something that is simply like the way business is done, right? So, for example, in fact, like in Bava Metzia Samech Chet Amud Bet to Samech Tet Amud Aleph, it seems like the first time we meet what's going to become the what's the word, the skeleton of the Heter Iska. It's actually in a situation where we're a little bit worried about the possibility of ribbit. And the example is, B'nei Rav Ilish, Nafek Alayu Ahu Shtara Dehavaktiv Be Palga Ba'agar Palga Behefsed, right? So there was a contract that came to light relating to the sons of Rav Ilish, because apparently their father entered into this contract. And in the contract, it said that Rav Ilish, it said half profit, half loss, meaning Rav Ilish and whoever the person was with whom he made the contract, they each were going to get half of the profits, and they each were going to get half of the loss. And the concern is actually, it seems like this was a situation in which, Rav Ilish was going to be the one or one of them was going to be the one investing the money, which is what an Iska is, where it's one person's money and the other person is investing it and doing the legwork. And Rava is concerned that if they're literally splitting the profits half and half, then what we're really talking about here is that in general, when somebody gives me an Iska, they give me the money and we say it's half yours, half mine, meaning the profits are half yours and half mine. Any loss we incur, half yours, half mine. What we're really saying is that this is a half pikadon, half of this is yours, right? And this is a half halva, half of it is mine because it's being lent to me. And sounds okay, but here's the problem. I'm now doing work in order to get that half halva, which itself is a form of ribit. I'm not allowed to do something extra for someone who gives me money. So Amar Rava, Rava says, Rav Ilish Gavar Rabahu, Rav Ilish was a great person, v'isura le'inshe lo hava safe, right? He says, I don't think that, he would do something like this, that's usher. So therefore, he says, manafshach. It's one way or another. E palga ba'agar, either they agree to have half of the profits, each one of them, but trey tilte behefsid. But one party accepted 2/3 of the loss, meaning the other party is gaining something by doing the work because they're only going to take 1/3 of the loss. So if you think about it, if this is a situation where half of this money is a pikadon and the other half is a halva, I'm going to get to put in the contract that I will take less of a loss in a case of loss, and you'll take on more. And in a way, that's kind of my payment for doing this work. So I'm not just for free doing this work in order to get a halva. And the other option is e palga behefsed, if we both agree that we are going to lose equally if there are losses here. Trey tilte ba'agar, it must be that one person, the person who's going to be going and doing the investing, because half of it is a halva, they are getting paid in some way. Namely, they are going to get more of the profits. They're going to get 2/3 of the profits, and that's considered their payment, right? So that's the first way we meet the backbone of the Heter Iska. The backbone of the Heter Iska is this sense that there is something called an Iska, where somebody gives money to B to go invest. That money, because they said that this investment is going to be each of us share the profits and each of us share the losses, that money is considered a half pikadon, meaning it half belongs to A the entire time, and it half belongs to B, so it's a half halva the entire time. In order to do that, and for B to actually go ahead and be the one who does some investing, B has to get paid a little bit. So maybe one way to get paid, and this is what the Gemara is saying, maybe one way to get paid is to actually have the conditions of the contract be more favorable to B. And that's kind of his or her payment for going and doing the investing. So the first time we meet Heter Iska, it's not like, hey, I want to figure out how I can give a loan on interest, so I'm going to, right? It's actually a situation where we were doing a business transaction and Chazal were worried that what happened here is that it was going to be a loan on interest. And what was the interest? Me being willing to do the legwork of the investment, right? So how that turns into a Heter Iska is a whole historical story, right? To be able to look back and say, we actually have this thing where it looks like it could end up being ribbit, but we find a way around it. So let's figure out, maybe we can use this in a situation where people actually want to give a loan and want to get around ribbit. So here's what I want to say before I even read an example of a Heter Iska. I want to say the Heter Iska is built on 3 important mechanisms, okay? Number 1, we are going to turn what seems to be a simple loan into some sort of business partnership. It may be a business partnership that ends up having half of it be a loan, but it's a business partnership where you're investing on behalf of someone else. Okay? That's one. Two, the recipient of the money who's supposed to make the investment has to get paid in some way for the work that they do investing the money, if it really is half a loan, like the case in our Gemara, what we call halga pikadon, half a pikadon, because it still belongs to the person who gave it to A, and palga milva, half of it is a halva, and this is the language that's used in Bava Metzia Kuf Daled Amud Bet, right? So if there's still a loan somewhere in there, B better get paid in some way for their work investing the money. But here's the third building block that's very important. The third building block that's very important is because B is the only one investing the money or taking care of the money, right? B is the one who knows what's going on with the money. B has to, in a case of loss or in a case of profits, B has to take an oath that if there are losses, B didn't do anything to cause those losses that are B's fault. Also, if there are gains, this is the amount of gains that we made, no more, no less. That oath becomes incredibly useful because what it means is if B doesn't want to take that oath, B has to just pay back the money, right? B has to just pay back the money. Because if B can't say, I swear that any loss that happened is not my fault and is refusing to take that oath, B has to pay back the principal. But it gets better. Because we can also create a condition where B wouldn't want to take that oath because it's such an intense oath. It's in front of a million people. You have to do it with Nikitat Chayfetz. You have to pick up a Sefer Torah and swear on it. Maybe even an oath, you can make a t'nai, you can make a condition that the oath is not even enough. It has to be that like the town clergy person has to be able to say, I know this, I know what happened with this investment and it wasn't this one B's fault. Like you kind of make it impossible or highly unlikely for B to take the oath. And you can even put a stipulation in to the contract that says, in lieu of taking an oath, B can choose instead to pay 5% on the principal, which is probably what the investment would have yielded anyway, so that B never has to take an oath. And even if it's more than 5%, A is waiving the rest of it. So these are the three building blocks. And I tell you the three building blocks, Baal Peh, before we read a Heter Iska, because I want you to like be able to always say, okay, I got it. It's three building blocks. One, we move it from a loan into a business transaction. Two, if there's a halva somewhere in the business transaction, the person who's getting it has to get paid for their work of investing the money. C, there is some stipulation that, I shouldn't have said C. Three, there's some stipulation that B can give some percentage of the principal to A in order to avoid having to take any oath. This way, you know that A is going to get back all their money and then some. Ta-da! Look at what happened. A invested $10,000 and is able to get 12,500 back, 12,500 back, right? Like that's what, if it was just a loan, we would say, that's ribbit. That's so good, but it's not a loan anymore. We figured it out. right? Exactly. So here's the Beit Din of America's Heter Iska. I'm going to share my screen. And, if you're listening, maybe look it up online. Not hard to find, Beit Din of America. Here we go. Here's the agreement. I, the undersigned, have received from A the sum of, let's just say $10,000, repayable over, let's just say 5 years, for the purpose of transacting business in connection with, fill in connection with, in which profits and losses are to be equally shared, right? That's exactly what we saw. We said this is a situation where half for you, half for me. However, the said party A has agreed that in lieu of sharing of profits and losses, which would require substantiation of all losses by 2 trustworthy witnesses, right? They added witnesses in here, and verification of all profits by oath. A decided instead that they'll accept my payment of an annual percentage of, I'll make up a percentage, 5% of the said sum of, we said it was $10,000, and waive all other profits which may be earned from the advance funds, right? See what happened here? I'm now, instead of having to take an oath if there are any losses, or about the profits, instead of having to bring witnesses if there are any losses, that it wasn't my fault, right? Now I can just pay B 5%, each year or total. And B doesn't come back and say, are there other profit? We're done. But then there's another piece. I have received a token payment of $1 from the said A for my efforts in connection with this undertaking, right? So that I'm not investing in order to get that half loan, which is what this, half loss, half profits. It means half of the money is mine as a loan. But I can't do this business. I can't go invest the money in order to get a half a loan, in order to get half the money as a loan. So I get a token payment of $1 so that it's not rebate, right? It's great. And have signed here with the receipt of said, monies. Sign this and this and this, right? So you see the 3 pieces here, right? The purpose here is transacting business. It's not a loan. The sharing of the profits and losses, instead of me, if we wanted to share profits and losses, instead of me having to explain exactly what the losses were and to take an oath on it and to bring witnesses on it, instead, we're going to bypass all that and we're going to make it tonight here a condition that instead of that, I can just pay a 5% on the principal. And that's it. Because that's maybe presumably what the profits would have been, maybe. And because we know from the Gemara and Bava Metzia that a situation like this, where you give me money to invest and we're supposed to share the profits and losses equally, is really at its heart half pikadon, half yours, and half hava, half mine. I also get paid $1 for doing this investing, so that I'm doing this, I'm getting paid for the investing in some way, instead of the hava being my payment for investing, which would be a problem of rebate. Now notice in our Gemara, nobody said, oh, Rav Ilish probably got $1 for investing. Instead, Rav Ilish got a better deal in terms of how much of profit he would get or how much of loss he would have to incur, right? This $1 is instead of that, okay? So that's what you have. I think, unless you're a lawyer, unless you're somebody who deals with contracts a lot, I find this confusing, but I do find that putting these 3 elements, right, and knowing that that's what's at the heart of an Iska, I think is very, very helpful and useful, okay? Now, that's like the basic. However, what I want to do is I actually want to spend the rest of the time reading the Igro Moshe, reading with Moshe Feinstein on Heter Iska, because he says, wait. There's actually 2 ways you can do the Heter Iska. I just gave you 1, but there's another that might be a little bit even better. And I shouldn't say even better. There's another one that may be better to be used in certain times. Now, we're going to read it, but I want to make 2 points clear. If you're a person who likes to go down this rabbit hole, I gave you, and the source sheet, at jlaw.com. And again, anybody here who's a lawyer, you should know about jlaw.com because it has amazing stuff on halakha, and on secular courts and the interaction between them, but also just on halakha, written by a lot of people who, know legalese. So it might sound like the idiom might sound better to you than the way that I might translate the Gemara. The second thing is, I would say there's a whole history to this. And I mentioned Rabbi Daniel Feldman's book last week on Letter and Spirit. He has a whole chapter on this, and it's great, and it's fascinating. And it's definitely, it's really worth looking through to see the different kinds of Heter Iskas that people made over time and what the concerns were. It's like a world in and of itself, I would say, right? Like you could spend a long time learning about Heter Iska, right? Now, you might be wondering also, I want to say one more thing before we get to Igro Moshe. You might be wondering also, what do you mean investing? Like, I'm borrowing money. I don't know. I'm borrowing money to pay my kids' tuition. I understand that's an investment in their future, right? So presumably, one way of understanding this is, okay, so I'm borrowing money to invest in tuition, stop saying that word, borrowing money to use in tuition so that I have other money that's freed up to invest, right? Like there are like steps here where it's like, oh, it must have first been only used for business transactions where there actually was going to be an investment. And then we start working on like, wait, but what about for mortgages where I'm trying to buy a house? I'm not trying to invest, right? So I have to think about you have to start to think about person B who's getting the money in order to invest it as somebody who's getting money so that maybe other money is freed up to be invested, right? And again, I mean investment to make money, not investment to be able to own a piece of property, which I understand will eventually make money, but it's not always necessarily that clear that the investment is immediate. So let's take a look at Rav Moshe. Okay. And again, anybody out there who's a lawyer, I'm sure you can explain this much easier, much more simply than I can. But I'm going to explain it the way that I understand it. I think I'm sharing the wrong. No, I think we're doing fine. Okay. So Igrot Moshe, Yordea, Chelik Bet, Siman Samach Bet. I do want to warn you that when I look this up, maybe I don't remember. I looked it up somewhere else and I couldn't find it, but this is through Bar Ilan. Okay. Be'inyan mortgage mashkanta, right? If you have a mortgage, hanahug bevatim, related to houses, ech osim shelo yeh be'eser ribit. How do you do it in such a way that there is no problem of interest, right? Presuming there's, Jews and Jews involved in this. And he'll say a little bit more about that. I don't know if we're going to get to it. So I'll basically say for Rav Moshe, even if the lender is a corporation, if the borrower is an individual person, ribbit applies. Okay, so here we go. He says, Hine vadai inyan mortgage she'osim b'medinatenu hu halva. Of course, a mortgage that we do in our country is a halva. It's a loan. V'yesh b'ze'er ribbit, which means that the prohibition of ribbit applies. V'tzarich lasot ba'oven shelo yeh ribbit. You have to do it in a way that it won't be ribbit. V'yesh b'zeh shnei drachim. And there are two ways to do it. Hint, the first is going to be the one that we said. Second is going to be something a little bit different. Okay? Aleph. Hu la'asot beheter iska. You do it using a heter iska. V'sheyidu shnei hatzdadim inyan ha'iska. The two sides must understand what this is. V'lo rak ba'amira uktiva bi'alma. And not just by, reciting or writing it. This is not magic, right? We want the two sides to understand it. If you haven't seen, there was a great piece in the Lair House on Mechirat Chametz that my friend Chaim Seaman had a friend of his who's a law professor. He's a Mormon law professor. Talk about, Nate Orman is his name, talk about buying chametz. And as a lawyer, how he understands it. He understands what he's doing, right? It's a great piece because it talks about why loopholes are religious and in what ways loopholes are religious. Ela shahu shutafut bahasakim. They have to understand that it's a partnership in a business venture. Sheyaseh mekabel hakesef bahasach shelokech. That the one who's getting the money, B, is going to do with the sum that they're getting. Kigon, for example, right? Like if B gets $10,000 from A. $5,000 of that is halva. It's a loan for B. וחמישה נשארו על הנותן שנחשב בשם פיקדון, right? And the other 5,000 are still considered in the ownership of A as a פיקדון. ונמצא שיש בהעסק מעות של שניהם מחצה למחצה, right? It sounds, meaning they are in this esek, in this business venture, they're half and half. ממילא יש להיות בין רווח, בין הפסד, בשווה, מחצה לזה. They each are supposed to get half of the רווח, half of the profits, half of the hefsed, half of the loss. ושמו בין שניהם כפי ידיעתם, and they appraise between the two of them based on their knowledge, שיכולים להרוויח בעסק, they are able to profit from this business venture. של סך 10,000 of $10,000 שהניחו בעסקה that they put in this business venture. למשל, for example, %. Maybe they know, maybe they think this is the return that we could get on $10,000. We could get 18%. ונמצא שהוא בעד חלק הנותן 10%, שהוא מחצה רווח. It means that A is going to get 9%, which is half of their profit. ואם שמו בפחות, and if they appraise it as less, יצטרכו להעמיד רווח הנותן מחצה כפי שישלמו שיהיה רווח בכל העסק. And if it's something else, they split it, whatever the profit is. ואם אחר כך יארע שלא יהיה כל כך רווח, right? And if afterwards it turns out that there isn't that kind of profit that they thought they were going to get, או חס ושלום הפסד, or maybe there's even a loss, אזי צריך הנותן לקח רק מחצה מרווח שהיה ומחצה מהפסד אם היה. Then also they're going to split the loss, split the רווח. אבל כיוון שהנותן אינו יודע, but because A doesn't know, כי הלא המקבל לבדו מתעסק בהן, because it's only B who's actually taking care of the money and investing it. ואינו מחויב להאמינו, and A doesn't have to believe B if A doesn't want to. לכך הותנה, therefore it's made, a condition is made, שאם יאמר המקבל, if B says, שלא היה רווח כפי שומתם, that they didn't make as much profit as they had originally estimated they would. וכל שכן כשיאמר שהיה ההפסד, and that much more so if B comes back and says there was a loss. שיצטרך להישבע בשבועה חמורה בנקיטת ספר תורה. That B is going to have to take a really serious shvuah, holding a sefer Torah, swear on the Bible, so to speak, but not so to speak, literally. V'yachol hatnot od chumrot b'hashvuah. And if A wants, A can make more conditions for what that oath looks like. Sheyadaf b'veit knesset b'shat hakriya b'fnei rabbim. Maybe it has to be in the shul in front of everybody in the time of kriyat Torah. V'sheyomar gam b'lashon klala. And maybe they even have to, there has to be like a curse al nafsho in eno omer emet. Maybe they say, and you'll be cursed if you're not telling the truth, right? Like make it really intense. Uvenuschaot katuv she'im yomar shaya hefsed yitztarech lahavi edim dafka, right? Says, and in some versions it says that if B says that there was a loss, that B has to bring edim. B, it's not just an oath, but B has to bring witnesses. But in this country, ba'avonotenu harabim, in our many sins, shechashudim kama anashim la'id shelo kedin, that you could have people who falsely testify, right? We say shalachein tov lahatnot sheyenem unuto b'shvua chamura. Gamal have said better to just go with an oath if there is, a really intensive oath if there's a loss. Mechar shelo yirtzeh liyishava yeh mechuyav lishalem. And because a person will not want to take that oath, B is not going to want to take that oath. B is going to have to pay lahanotain to A. Et chelek harevach shehitnu, the amount of profit that they had said they were going to make. Zehu inyan heter iska she'inhigu. This is what a heter iska is. You pick a percentage of profit that you assume you're going to get beforehand, and in lieu of taking an oath, B can come back and just pay that percentage, along with the principal, obviously, right? Great. That's version 1. That's the version we've already seen. We've now drilled it in, right? Half pikadon, half milveh. Obviously, B has to get paid in some way, and B is going to pay a certain percentage to A in lieu of taking an oath that there was less profit or that they suffered a loss. And then ipso facto, you have A giving B a certain amount of money, B giving A back that money plus a certain percentage, right? But it's not a violation of rebate. Okay, beautiful. Let's talk about bet. Okay, second option. And there's more in Rav Moshe. If you want to read it, there's more. But let's talk about bet. He says, there's another option. Let's try to do it in a way where there's no halva in this at all. Let's see. Lasot ba'ofen shaleka halva klal. Do it in a way that there's no loan here. Ella lefisach hamaot sheyesh lenoten hamortgage. The total amount that the giver of the mortgage, A, has and gives. Ben shua mocher atzmo, whether it's the person selling the house, ben shua acher, or they're a third party. Hu kinyan shelo b'habayit mamash. The amount that they put in to this business venture, that A puts into the business venture, is actually purchasing part of the house itself. So, kigon, for example, im habayit shaveh esrim elef. Let's say the house is worth $20,000. Halavai, I mean, not halavai because you get what you pay for it, but you know what I mean. Let's say the house costs $20,000. V'ha mortgage hu asar alafim, and the mortgage is $10,000. Yesh la'anotin chatzi habayit. Ula lokech chatzi habayit. A now owns half the house, and B now owns half the house. No halva. Okay, so how are we going to get B to pay A like a little bit of a percentage above what A gave them? So let's see. V'halokeach socher et hachetzi shel bal hamortgage v'hasach sheyachshavu kama oleh hapercentin l'shana. You know what happens here? How are we going to get B to give more money back to A? B is going to now rent that other half that A owns from A, a certain amount. And B will continue renting that other half of the house from A based on the number of years that they decide. Uzman pir'on haschirut hu kefi hacheshbon b'chol chodesh. And the zman pir'on, every month, B will pay a little bit. It's rent. Kigon, and we'll give an example. Shaha percentin sheyesh lo litol. Let's say the percent that A is going to take, hu shmona v'chetzi, right, is 8.5%. That's the percent, what we would call the percent interest rate, I guess, right? Ole ze ba'ad aseret alafim l'shana, $850. That's going to be for $10,000. That's going to be $850 a year. So yichtivu shemeshalem lo schirut l'shana, $850. We're going to say, okay, B is going to pay $850 a year. And if it's for many years, yichtivu asach זה לכל שנה, או לצריף כמה הם בעד כל השנים. Right? You could say this is what B has to pay in schirut, in rental fees for a year. You could say this is what B has to pay in rental fees over 25 years, right? Doesn't matter. וצריך לכתוב שהותנה שאינו יכול למכור חלקו בבית לאחר. We also have to say there's a condition that A can't sell that house, that half of the house, to anybody else. וגם איך שמוכרח למכור חלקו להלוקח, שיש לו חצי אחר זמן שיתנו במקח הזה, אף אם יתייקר. And also that half of the house must be sold back to the sold back to be, or sold to be, I guess. Well, I guess sold back, right? After whatever amount of time, even if it's now more expensive, like even if it's gone up in value, right? And then Rav Moshe continues. But I want to talk about this move. Because what this move does is it says, yeah, we're going to turn this loan into a business transaction. But the business transaction is not what you think. The business transaction, the money is actually all pikadon. That's maybe a bad way to say it. Yeah, man. I'm trying to think if that's a fair way to say it. Let me think for a minute. Yeah, I think that's a fair way to say it. Right? Meaning the money is now all pikadon. Or in some ways, the house is all pikadon, right? I'm living in the house. I'm sitting in the house. But now I'm going to turn into a socheret. I'm going to turn into a renter. And the rental fees is going to be something that I'm going to be paying above the principal, right? Maybe the mortgage will include some of the principal, but the point is it's also above some of the principal, right? So this is a little bit different because if you remember, we said that a Heter Iska is built on three things. One, you turn the loan into a different business venture. You have that here too. But two, because the business venture is, we're going to split the proceeds equally, and half of it is a pikadon and it's yours, but half of it is a loan and it's mine. I need to get some sort of payment in order to do the investing. Here, you don't need that because none of the money that you put in, or I should say, you already got something for the money that you put in. It's yours. There is no halva here. And so the third piece also, which is I'm going to pay you, I don't know, 5% so that I don't have to take an oath that I lost some of the money, or I don't have to take an oath that all we made, or I lost some of the money and it's not my fault, or I don't have to take an oath that this is the amount of money profit that we made that's a little bit less. So I'm just going to pay you whatever the percentages that we came up with in the first place. That's different here too, right? It's not, this oath stuff is a totally different thing. It's actually because I'm paying you in schirut, I'm paying you to rent my house, like I'm renting part of my house from you who own it, right? That whole situation of the percentage is what I'm paying on my mortgage, right? So I just like this because I think it gives you a sense of like how, first of all, how much cleverness is here, how much creativity is here. And it's so clear that what we're talking about is need. You know what I mean? Like we're talking about need and trying to figure out how halakha can respond to the need. But what I think is really significant is what Rav Moshe started with, which is if you don't know what you're doing, then you're just treating it like magic. And you're actually missing the beauty of what we're trying to do here, which is to have our cake and eat it too. So I guess that's my like 35 minutes on Heter Iska. There is so much more for people who are interested. But that's, that's what makes it serious, to be honest. The fact that there's so much more, and that there are people who said, well, I don't think when it's a half mil, that's not so good because just paying somebody a little bit of money, that's not good enough. The Vilna Gaon was like, no, it has to be full pikadon, right? Like they actually had machlokot about these things because they were taking it like seriously. It wasn't just an afterthought. It was really serious. Be well, my friends. See you next week.